Welcome back, students. In this video, we will study about the Haristorero equilibrium. You have already seen the benchmark model where we assumed flexible wages in both the sectors in the previous video. Now we are going to relax this assumption. We are going to relax the flexible formal wage assumption, and we are going to look at the actual model, actual Haristorero equilibrium, where we have rigid wages in the urban formal sector. In other words, we can say that there is a binding wage floor in the urban formal sector, while the agricultural wages are still flexible. Under this assumption now, let's see how do we arrive at the Haristorero equilibrium. So if we are talking about a binding wage floor in the industrial sector, again remember that we are putting in the industrial wages on this vertical axis and agricultural wages on this vertical axis, and the labor is being read as labor of industry and labor in the agricultural sector, this side. So we have the usual demand curves for industry and agriculture. If we have a binding wage floor, that means that the industrial wage is stuck at this level. As a result, only OL labor can be hired. So just from the reading from the demand curve from the industrial labor, OL level of labor can be hired in the formal sector. Under this now we need to figure out the equilibrium. First, let's consider whether there can be an equilibrium with different wages in both the sectors, that is unequal wages. So we are just considering this possibility. We are actually going to reject it. So let's say that W bar is the industrial wage and WA is the agriculture wage, and W bar is greater than WA. So we have a lower agricultural wage somewhere here and a higher industrial wage. Can this be an equilibrium? That means can this be a steady state kind of a scenario in this model? This is not possible, because under this possibility of unequal wages, there will always be an incentive to migrate to the other sector, that is the higher paying sector. So people will always have an incentive to move from agriculture to industry. So in this sense, this is not an equilibrium, because there is a pressure to migrate. So steady state means that you remain where you are. But here, the people who are earning this low wage, they actually don't want to remain in the agricultural sector anymore. They don't want to remain where they are. They want to move to the higher paying sector. So there is going to be a pressure to migrate in this sector. As a result, this is not an equilibrium. The other possibility is that instead of unequal wages, we have equal wages in both the sectors. So again, we are considering the possibility whether this is a possible equilibrium or not. So wherever the industrial wage is stuck at the same level, we'll have a agricultural wage also. Remember, we can't move the industrial wage. So if we are saying that they are equal wages, then agricultural wage has to be equal to this fixed rigid industrial wage. As a result of this high agricultural wage, these many people are going to be hired. We can call this O-L- in the agricultural sector. So here we have agricultural employment and here we have the industrial employment. But what about these remaining people? These remaining people are now unemployed. because OL has been absorbed by the industry and O dash L dash has been absorbed by the agriculture. So the remaining people are actually unemployed. Now, can we have an equilibrium with such an unemployed sector also emerging? This is not possible. First, consider the fact that these unemployed workers can always flow into agriculture. As a result, wages will be driven down, right? And then we will again reach the case A, which we have already discussed, which can't be an equilibrium, which means that all of these unemployed people must be in the urban sector. This situation can definitely never be an equilibrium. We are saying that people are leaving their short agricultural wage, which is equal to the industrial wage, and there is also a possibility of getting unemployed in the urban sector, and people are still migrating through the urban sector. This does not make rational sense. So if we assume people are rational, there is an element of rationality, then it is not possible that people move from agriculture to industrial and then form this unemployed pool. Therefore, this case with equal wages in both the sectors can also not be an equilibrium. The only alternative now for a stable equilibrium, so we can call that case C, is that these people are actually not unemployed, but they are absorbed in the urban informal sector. So in the Haristorero model, this is what results in the emergence of the informal sector, which absorbs all the people who have migrated to in the industrial sector but couldn't be absorbed because of the rigid high urban wage. Now let's try to find the equilibrium condition. For this, let's define LF and LI. LF is the number of vacancies in the urban formal sector. So formal for F stands for formal here, and informal LI is the informal employment, number of people in the informal sector. We are assuming here that the informal sector can grow as large as possible at the fixed wage informal. So it has an elastic a perfectly elastic supply, which means no matter, even if there are more number of people in the informal sector, the wage is going to remain at WI. So it does not respond to, the wage does not respond to changes in L. Given these variables, we can define LF by LI plus LF as the probability of finding an urban formal sector job. So in the numerator we have the number of vacancies, and in the denominator we have the number of job seekers. As a result, we get the probability of finding urban formal job. Similarly, LI by LF plus LI is equal to the probability of finding informal job, which means this is the probability that you did not get the urban formal job and therefore you had to be absorbed in the informal sector. Now a worker will compare the expected urban wage. So now these are basically the probabilities. So what we care about is the expected urban wage, because it's not a sure shot thing that you will get the industrial wage, the urban formal sector wage. If you get the urban sector job, then yes, you will get this higher wage of the industrial sector. But if you cannot find the job, then you will have to be absorbed in the informal sector at a lower wage W informal. Thus, the worker, while he is deciding to migrate or not, is going to compare the expected urban wage to the rural wage, and this is how he decides whether to migrate or not. In equilibrium, we can define again the equilibrium where there is no pressure to migrate. So let me erase this. In equilibrium, that is, there is no pressure to migrate. The expected urban wage and the rural wage should be equal to each other. So we can write LF by LF plus LI W bar industry plus LI divided by LF plus LI W informal equals W agriculture. So what are we doing here? LHS is your expected urban wage. Remember expectation. What is expectation? Probability of X into X plus probability of Y into Y. So what is the probability you will get the urban wage? Into the urban wage itself plus the probability of getting informal job into the multiplied by the informal wage. This entire thing, this is the expected urban wage, this should be equal to the rural wage. So this defines our Haristorero equilibrium. The values of WA, so this, and LI, which bring about this equality, are going to solve the model. So in equilibrium, this equilibrium condition tells us how many people will migrate, which is basically the question that we were trying to answer. What is it that pushes people to migrate from agriculture to industry? So how many people are actually going to migrate in this model? It is not very easy to see this on the diagram, but we can draw to just depict the same. So we have the industrial wage, industrial demand, and the agricultural demand, and the labor in industry sector and labor in agricultural sector. So we are saying now that in this model we have a high formal sector wage, and we have some agricultural wage. Somewhere informal sector wage is lower than this agricultural wage. So we can say that the industrial wage is greater than the agricultural wage, which is greater than the informal sector wage. So now this completes the model. With this wage structure, we have these many people in the industrial sector, these many people in the agricultural sector, and the remaining these many people are not unemployed. They are in the informal sector and they are earning the wages informal. So this W agriculture basically is determined equal to the expected urban wage, which we showed previously in the equilibrium condition, and this basically tells us how many people are going to migrate. This itself is going to depend on the probabilities of finding the formal sector or the informal sector job. So that's how the model is basically explains the incentive to migrate and the equilibrium condition.